vegetables, and other farm products as part of the National Agriculture Day dialogue on the future of food and farming. I'm Chris Galen. I'm with the National Milk Producers Federation, which is based just across the river in Arlington, Virginia. I'm also on the board of the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance. And USFRA is a coalition that came together a little more than a year ago of farmer and rancher-run organizations. And we're acknowledging that the future of food isn't what it used to be. And by that I mean the future of farming and where our food comes from. These have different definitions and different outlooks than we would have answered those questions in the past. Consumers' expectations, indeed the expectations of the entire value chain, all the way from farm to fork, those expectations have evolved. And that's why USFRA was formed a year ago to talk about our work, our farmers' products, where they come from, and have that conversation with everyone across the value chain. So today is Super Wednesday. It also happens to be the eve of National Agriculture Day. So we thought that this was an opportune time to have a conversation about how we can continue to improve the way we grow food here in this country, to provide healthy food choices to all Americans and indeed to people all around the world. For those of you who are listening via our webcast, our web stream, you can go to fooddialogues.com to learn more about the history and the mission of USFRA. For those who want to join the Twitter discussion, you can use the @USFRA identification, and we have a hashtag for this event today. It's FoodD, F-O-O-D, and another D. Now, the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance is pleased to work with Agri-Pulse Communications in the sponsorship of this event, and I'd like to introduce Sarah Wyant, who is the CEO of Agri-Pulse, who will introduce our panelists. Sarah?
Well, thank you, Chris, and thanks to all of you for joining us today for our celebration of National Agriculture Day and for this event on food and the future of food and farming. And it is a wonderful day to be involved with American agriculture, isn't it? Yeah. Our question today is whether or not technology in agriculture is creating environmental improvements and economic gain or perpetuating public fears. I'm Sarah Wyant, the editor of Agri-Pulse, and we publish a farm and rural policy electronic newsletter and website. I hope some of you in here have seen that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And just a few reminders before we get started. First of all, an essential is to please mute your cell phones if you're like me, you've gotten in here and still maybe buzzing a little bit. And secondly, that we're going to be recording and streaming this live. So, as Chris mentioned, please make sure you follow us on fooddialogues.com, and the recording online will be available tomorrow. To submit a question for our esteemed panel here, you can use the note cards that are available on your chairs and in the back of the room. And if you have any questions, please pass them to the end of the aisle, and they'll be picked up, and you'll be able to participate that way. And last but not least, everyone is invited to join us after this panel for a reception that Agri-Pulse is sponsoring in this same room. So first, I'd like to start off by introducing our moderator, Alan Yerga. Alan, welcome. Alan covers agricultural policy news for Bloomberg. He's the author of a recently released book called Endless Appetites: How the Commodities Casino Creates Hunger and Unrest, which discusses changes in food supply, demand, and trading that have created a new era of price volatility for food. Alan's the former president of the National Press Club. He's won awards from the Overseas Press Club, the New York Press Club, the Society of American Business Editors and Writers, and the North American Agricultural Journalists. He grew up on a family farm in Minnesota, and a little known fact about Alan, actually there's a lot of little known facts about Alan. You should check out his Wikipedia page. but he has an office at the Litton Building right next to Agri-Pulse, and so we frequently, when we're not writing and doing events like this, we host holiday parties together. Alan is the singer.
Oh.
I just put the cookies. We also have 5 dynamic individuals here to serve as panelists with us here today. To my immediate left, Roger Beachy, former director of the National Institute of Food and Agriculture at USDA and president emeritus of the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center. His efforts at USDA have focused on multidisciplinary grants that aid challenges such as the impact of climate change. He's recognized for his work in molecular biology, gene expression, and for the development of virus-resistant transgenic plants. So welcome, Dr. Bucci. Immediately to his left is Patrick O'Toole, a Wyoming, Colorado rancher and a Agri-Advisory Board member. His public lands ranch, Ladder Livestock, is a 6th-generation family operation that raises cows and sheep in the Little Snake River along the Wyoming-Colorado border. And I've been assured that it is amazingly beautiful on his ranch. He's been recognized for his role in balancing agricultural production and conservation values. Mr. O'Toole served on the Wyoming House of Representatives and was appointed by President Clinton to serve on the Western Water Policy Review Advisory Commission. He currently serves as president of the Salisbury Livestock Company and president of the Family Farm Alliance. Next is Eileen Langdon, a family farmer, a mom, a full-time practicing veterinarian, and obviously one busy lady. On their 205-acre farm, Dr. Langdon and her husband raise pigs, cattle, a variety of crops with sustainable practices, and she recently won an award for the National Pork Board. She takes responsibility, she says, for continuing the family farm and raising a generation who will focus on business as well as the environment. To her left is Brian Gurlum. Brian is no stranger to many of you who work on Capitol Hill. He's currently Director of Government Affairs for Cargill, where he coordinates public affairs activities on sustainability, climate change, environment, domestic and international tax issues, healthcare, labor, and just a few other things. Mr. Gurlum was on Capitol Hill as a professional staffer for the House Committee on Agriculture. And prior to that, he was executive director of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. And last, but certainly not least, is Dave White. Dave serves as chief of the Natural Resources Conservation Service. He has served with the agency in Missouri, Montana, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Washington, D.C. As chief, he leads 12,000 employees and has a budget of $4 billion that he was lucky enough to discuss with the Appropriations Subcommittee this morning. Dave has also been detailed to the Senate Ag Committee for work on both the 2008 Farm Bill and the 2002 Farm Bill under Mr. Harkin and Mr. Lugar. And from my own personal position, it's hard to find any public servant who is as dedicated and as talented as Chief White. So welcome to all of our panelists today. And with that, I'd like to turn the moderation over to Alan. Thank you.
And thank you, Sarah. And thank you, everyone who is here this afternoon, both in the audience as well as the people who are watching this webcast and will be watching it later, I'm sure, when it is replayed. It's so important to have an interest in the issues of agriculture as we see the world's population on an upward trajectory and food demand rising even more quickly than that because of increased demand in emerging markets. These markets are of great interest, not just to the people in those markets, but to American farmers who are increasingly being called upon to feed the world, along with other challenges in other markets and in other countries that are feeding the world as well. This panel today comes from a wide swath of people, different perspectives, from production agriculture to research to government to the corporate sector. And over the next 45 minutes or so, we'll certainly want to hear a wide range of what they have to say about these issues that are so challenging for agriculture today, for which technology is going to be such an important, playing such a key role in the future. So starting forth with these questions, I start off with Roger Beachy. You are a person who has worked, you've worked in government, you've worked with the private sector, you've worked as a scientist, you've also worked with other people in a more political realm to get things done. When you're looking at technology and agriculture and research, especially at a time when you see government budgets being pressured, and even corporate budgets, because of profitability, being pressured, what are some of the key priorities you see going forward for research and technology and development of those challenges of feeding the world?
Why don't you make it an easy question? I thought that kickoff would be relatively technology has always been applied in agriculture in different ways, whether it's in mechanical engineering to make a better harvester, or whether it's in genetics to develop a new variety that's resistant to what I grew up with, the corn leaf blight, which swept across the middle of the country in the 70s. We've always had the presence of mind to invest in the research that will be predictive of success in the future. Right now, more than ever, we're under challenges to produce sustainably and to produce sufficient amounts. We are under pressure to suit different markets. The Secretary of Agriculture talks about the coexistence of multiple markets so that everybody can have their advantage or their choice. But increasingly, we're finding that the challenges that we have set out for U.S. farmers are also being met by those in other economies. Visited Brazil recently, and we know how much China is investing. We know what Brazil is investing. We know what happens when Ukraine comes online as the next big producer of wheat. And we know that will challenge the economy of the American agriculture producer. So while we look at the global needs of food, we also look at the changes in the globe in capabilities. And research that we do here needs to be positioned to ensure that the economic vitality of American agriculture is assured into the future, because that's a big part of our economy, and that it still gives the choice of different kinds of agriculture. And my concern is how we choose those priorities, how we match what the private sector is doing, what needs to happen with the government sponsorship, how we put those together so we aren't duplicating efforts, and that at the end we come out with a synergy of activities, not a competition of activities, all the while considering what the consumer is after.
Chief White, you have the $4 billion budget, and I'm sure you're fighting for every penny you can get. Dr. Beachy talked a little bit about making sure that the resources between the public and private sector are leveraged most effectively in a less duplicative way to make sure that things are done most effectively. A two-part question for you. First part, what do you do as the head of an agency within USDA to ensure that budget that you do have and those efforts that you do make are targeted in the most effective way? And then leading into that, when you take those resources, what sort of agriculture are you encouraging and moving toward? What is agriculture going to look like in 20 years, in part because of the efforts you're making through your agency now?
Alan, I know we're projecting on the future and technology, but we live in today. And technology is merely a tool. And regardless of the technology 20 years from today, I think that the fiber and the character of the men and women who own and operate our land will endure. As an agency perspective, it's my job to get the most value for the taxpayer. And I think what you will see in the future is a lot more leveraging, not just financial resources, but also human resources. We need more boots on the ground to work around the country. They don't necessarily have to be federal feet in those boots. So as you look at leveraging those dollars and the increase in partnerships, whether it's with state agencies or non-governmental organizations or private industry, I think you're going to see huge increases in that area as we really try to protect and sustain the resource base. You mentioned the population increase. We know we have to increase production. And can we do it in a way where we still have clean air, clean water, abundant wildlife, and a healthy environment for everyone? And I'm very bullish that we can do that.
Following on that to Mr. O'Toole, dealing with conservation, sustainability, a word that Dr. Beachy said. Looking at your own ranch and that evolution, even if we're not projecting 20 years into the future, even looking at the last 20 years as an indicator of the direction that we're going in, how has conservation practice evolved on your ranch? What sort of awareness are you seeing of sustainability and conservation issues among the ranchers that you work with?
Well, for us, the ranch that I live on existed before there was a BLM or Forest Service. And so, we watched the evolution, and interestingly, the initial guy settled right on the state line, so we have double bureaucrats on both sides of the line. And it's been an evolutionary process, and I would tell you that thanks to the leadership of Chief White, there's some tools that we have dealing with endangered species issues, which if you knew my life, you would know it is very much driven by endangered species concerns. We protect Upper Colorado trout. We have won some awards for protecting Sage-Grouse, but we look at it as long-term tradition. In our family, it's been a tradition to try to balance those uses. And I think if you really want to understand Western agriculture, you have to understand that you're dealing with multiple agencies, not just USDA, but also the Department of Interior. I think what has been cutting edge and has come out of USDA really in this last go-round has been a much more productive integration of the agencies working together, which from our side, we're expected to double food production in the next 40 years. We feel like we're up to that challenge, but we have to have the assistance of the agencies to understand that not only are we trying to balance with conservation our production, but we have to be cognizant that there's a banker out there that wants to make sure that his piece of the action is taken care of.
Not to pick on you right away, because everybody's getting their one question, but I'm going to ask you a second one. But before we get to our other two, could you give an example of how those interests of conservation and production work together in terms of the practices on your land, which are both promoting sustainability while promoting greater production?
Well, for us, we're in that very fortunate group that has 2 children at home. And that tells you diversify, diversify, diversify. The protection of the Upper Colorado trout part has become a great fishery that's a part of our business model. And we actually have elder hostile birders have come to the ranch to see grouse and other proliferation of birds that we have. Don't ever get in front of an elder hostile birder if they see a new species. But for us, it's trying to integrate some other economic models that are kind of balance out with what we're doing with our production side.
Dr. Langton, Mr. O'Toole just mentioned that he has children, which means diversify, diversify, diversify. I see that you are a mother of 3, so your life must be incredibly diverse.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah.
Your day job is as a veterinarian, and I'm sure you have many other roles as well. But focusing on that one,
Okay.
You're dealing with animal welfare and animal health, and undoubtedly advising on animal treatment. There's been a lot of publicity in that area. There's been a lot of attention towards animal treatment practices. What would you have to say as far as your impressions as far as standards of animal welfare treatment in the U.S. among the farmers and ranchers that you work with, and any sort of evolution you've seen both in the standards themselves and an awareness of the importance of those standards?
I would say that it has definitely evolved also, that my clients and on our own farm and on the farmers that are in my area that the certification programs that have come along, like the Pork Quality Assurance Plus program, the Beef Quality Assurance, is giving producers the skills they need to raise the bar, and everybody has. I'm seeing that on the farm. I'm seeing that on my clients' farms. they all have a moral imperative to take care of their animals and take care of the natural resources that they take care of. So they feel obligated and accountable for doing that, and they have it's happening. They're taking care of their animals, and they're going through these programs so they are prepared to treat their animals and getting advice, from veterinarians on how to treat and prevent and control disease.
And Mr. Dearlam, you are a representative here working, sort of bringing it all together. You're dealing with one of the world's largest agribusinesses, bringing a whole value chain together worldwide. There's been some discussion about comparative advantage and competitive advantage. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about comparative advantage as it looks around world agricultural production, but then take a look at competitive advantage and the role that you see the government and the private sector playing in helping all farmers become more competitive and better producers.
I think what we've heard over the previous four panelists is the importance of technology, the importance of conservation, the importance of animal welfare. And I think if you think about where the initial technology began, maybe with on the production side, with plowing and efficiency that way, on through agronomic efficiencies, on through the technology that we're utilizing in our facilities today, whether it's dealing with food safety, whether it's dealing with reducing water usage, water efficiency, dealing with capturing greenhouse gases, reducing natural gas usage in our facility. It's all about becoming more efficient so that we're providing the consumers what they need. In terms of directly answering your question about comparative advantage, you look at how productive U.S. farmers and ranchers are, the breadbasket that exists in the U.S. We have the productive efficiency to outcompete the world when it comes to food, fiber, resources, and we should do that and export our abundance to countries that perhaps don't have that capability. There are a lot of, as we look at the numbers, we're estimating 9.3 billion by 2050, and a lot of those new citizens of the world will be in places where they're going to suffer from a couple of challenges. Number one, because of the population and the density, they won't have the space to grow food, nor will they have the weather conditions that allow them to grow it sufficiently. And so from our viewpoint, you're going to have to get food from areas of surplus to areas of deficit in order to deal with that coming situation. And it's going to take technology to do it, but technology that's consistent with the values of the folks that are growing it.
One word that has been bandied about in the discussion thus far, and you hear it bandied about a lot of places, I think it's a very popular word in part because it can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, is sustainability. I'm wondering if anyone out of this group of five would be so brave as to venture a definition of sustainability from their own perspective. So maybe we can get a little bit of a sense of what this means to different people and different stakeholders in the process. Who would like to start?
For me, it means a balance so that I can keep going year after year. Look at my grass resource, my water resource, my genetics. But I always think when we talk about sustainability, which, as you said, means so many things to different people, it has to be in the context of what American agriculture is, and that's redundant. It has to be a redundant capability so that whenever you have a Florida freeze, you have a California crop. Whenever you have a disease situation or a drought situation, we have that redundant capability. And so I think it means on the individual level, how do you maintain yourself and your operation and your family? But it means in the bigger picture, how do we produce enough to not only feed ourselves but feed the world?
Patrick's exactly right. If we walk into any grocery store in any town, there's going to be 10, 20,000 items on the shelf. And they don't come from some factory. They come from the fact that we have 6 inches of good topsoil, the fact that it rains occasionally, and the miracle of photosynthesis. And I would like my kids to walk into every grocery store, and my grandkids, and all those little Americans who are going to come after us, and they can enjoy the same bounty that we enjoy today.
Others?
I usually you hear this question of sustainability in so many ways and so many different audiences. I usually try to couch sustainability as scientifically definable, not philosophically framed, but scientifically defined. What is the quality of the soil today, and how can we make sure that it's as good or better tomorrow than it is today? What is the quality of our water, and how can we assure that it's cleaner tomorrow than it is today? Sustainability is not a fixed platform. It's a platform that changes. It's a goal to be achieved, and that goal changes over a decade and over the next decade. Just as we expect more of our automobiles to have a higher gas mileage, we expect sustainability to change with the knowledge that science brings to it. How do we make a cleaner soil? What is the context of good soil management and good economic vitality of the agriculture as a consequence of managing the soil appropriately? Those go hand in hand. So often I'm put in a defensive position by an audience that defines sustainability more philosophically. I was stunned by the discussion that a graduate student hit me with one time at a university in California, and she was a soils person. She had no connection, hadn't linked her science, the science of soils, to sustainability. Yet they have to be defined scientifically. So whatever definition we come out with today, I hope it includes the recognition that the bar changes as we learn more science. The bar of what is sustainability changes as we learn how to do it better.
In many of the activities I've participated in, it seems there's a triangle between environmental sustainability, economic sustainability, and social sustainability. And I think so long as you keep those three things in balance, and I think we've heard that today, it's a balance between those three areas, then you're hitting the mark.
I would just add, Alan, that I saw a definition for sustainability embodies stewardship. And I think if we, farmers and ranchers are, for the most, all of us are stewards, and that sustainability will be a result of our stewardship today and in the future.
Add one thing, Alan.
Certainly.
The diversity of thoughts here, they're all similar, but it also leads to one of the problems we have with the lack of a common definition. So does Cargill meet the European definition of sustainability, or the consortium of American companies who are going to come out with one, or the big box group that's going to have their own definition? And what does the producer do, and how does DuPont market to these things? And this plethora of different sustainability labels is actually making it much more difficult for agriculture. It would be grand if we could rally around, this is what it is, and we could all work towards that common goal.
And somehow I don't think we're going to definitively resolve that today.
We could. Let's try.
Dr. Beachy had a point.
Just a finish. I think Dave's exactly right. We need some guidance and standard. And the question is, how does that come about? Do we do it in the context of the producers and so forth, or do you do it in a different way? And I think we should be looking for a definition, one that works, and one that can be defined and maybe even branded.
Well, and I would like to actually follow up with Mr. Toole again, since you, Mr. O'Toole, were so kind as to start the last round, just to sort of start another discussion here, and it goes with the work that you've been doing with the Agri initiative. For people who may not be as familiar with this, and please correct me if I'm not correct on this either, but my understanding of your initiative is it's really bringing a wide consortium of stakeholders together: production agriculture, organic agriculture, large businesses, small businesses, public sector, private sector, in a dialogue supported by some of the leading foundations funding this effort over a multiple year period of time to try to get people to agree, in the sense of coming up with some of this common ground and figuring out what you can do and work forward from there. And I'd be interested if you could describe a little bit of the work that you've already done in trying to get some of these various stakeholders to agree.
First, let me say, a thought at the end of the last conversation is in the last 5 years, I've seen the wettest year I've ever been through, and the driest in the history of our ranch. And this really wise guy that does a lot of river restoration said, Mother Nature always gets the last at bat. And when you put the context of agriculture, especially in the context of where we're going to try to go, you need to understand that farmers and ranchers somewhere in America are facing some weather-driven crisis right now. and yet we're trying to sustain ourselves over a long period of time. What Agri has shown me in the almost year that we've been able to spend together and see, first, the diversification of agriculture, is that we're sort of on a path of one type of agriculture is critical of another type. We're in a lot of ways, there's a pitting of this type of agriculture versus that, big versus small, urban versus rural, and what has really occurred to me, and I think in conversations with my colleagues, is how important it is to expand the pie, to really embrace that the differences in agriculture in America are our strength, and that by enhancing all the pieces, we're going to be much stronger than we are pitting some types against other types.
But when you're looking at some of those differences, it's not just even within agriculture. It's between agricultural groups and groups outside of agriculture, or constituencies outside of agriculture, that would like to see agriculture be done a certain way. I think specifically of examples within animal agriculture, where you have a lot of ballot initiatives and a lot of consumer concern about ways that animals are treated. And you will get opposition, pushback to some issues that are put forth by, say, animal rights groups, from production agriculture, saying we do care about our animals, we are doing these things. There's a lot of misperceptions going on out there. I'd be interested, Dr. Langdon, in your impressions on this debate, as you look at some of the concerns that have been expressed about practices in animal agriculture with what you see on the ground, and as you see practices evolving as scientific understanding advances.
Well, I think animal welfare is a complex issue that, there's different ways and it's still animal care, different ways of doing things that are still considered animal care. And as a veterinarian, I think, it's part of what we do to be sure that animals are treated like they're, the animal welfare is there in the practices and the farms that we go to. But it all has to be taken in context also. I think it's a matter of consumers understanding how we do what we do on the farm, and starting the conversation about how it's done, and it being managed and I'm sorry, and so that we can understand each other about what animal welfare is.
Mr. Derlam, Cargill is involved in a group that is actually working towards a discussion on beef sustainability. And I'm interested in your thoughts, especially working in agribusiness. When you're having your discussions, what role do consumer concerns and consumer choices play in what you see as the end product that ultimately goes to a consumer?
I think that one of the ideas about I've been involved in the Global Roundtable on Sustainable Beef, and we've had the dialogue about what is the definition of sustainability. And there's enough people in the room that we could consume, a couple of years worth of time, resolving it. But I think that you could pose the question, should we? Is it a worthy exercise or not? Because I think consumer choice is important. I think it's amazing when you go into the grocery store, you don't walk down the toothpaste section, you walk down the toothpaste aisle. The choice that you have in America is vast. You can walk to the egg section, for example, and you can find as a consumer exactly what it is you're looking for. So we as an industry and as consumer group and as farmers and ranchers and companies that are involved in that could spend a lot of time deciding on definitions, or we could work with consumers like we do and figure out what specific firms, companies, consumers want and offer it in the marketplace. If there's a demand for it, groups of farmers will offer it in the marketplace and it'll sell. And so that's where we work with a number of companies, trying to identify what it is they want, trying to figure out what the demand drivers are. I think what has really changed is you no longer have, agriculture has changed to where it's no longer, I'm going to produce a commodity and here you companies and you consumers figure out how to use it. It's really changed from one of I'm a company, I'm a customer, I'm looking for a specific function. You, the producer, you, the Cargill, figure out how to grow what it is I need. And so I think that's really a changing dynamic.
If I could just add, Alan, it should be recognized by this audience that the Department of Agriculture sponsors a lot of research, and not enough, in my opinion, needs much more. But it's important that in the context of this discussion, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture did respond to the concerns of the consumer, did implement a research program about welfare. How do you define it scientifically? What is best for an animal, and how is it different for a chicken and a goat and a beef cattle? The Agriculture Research Service also invests in this topic. So the department was made aware of the concerns and responded accordingly with science experiments. Now those aren't all finished, but we're learning more every year. So again, if it's a definable question, we should also imply a role for science discovery in helping the producers do their job a little bit more effectively, sustainably, and with animal welfare in mind. The department listens, and I think there's a role for science here in the final outcome.
I probably should address your animal welfare question. I mean, we believe in transparency as a company, and we about a year ago we let Oprah and her show into our plant in Fort Morgan, Colorado, which was much to the chagrin of many in the industry. But we believe in transparency. We believe that we have a great record of animal welfare in our facility. We have working with a third-party vendor that that monitors what goes on in our facility every hour that our facility is open to make sure there's no mistreatment of the animals, that they are treated well in our facility. Everything is designed according to Temple branded standards. And so we believe that we have a good story to tell in terms of animal welfare and how we work with our suppliers, that we think consumers value that and we want to meet that demand.
In general, is that something that you could see agriculture doing more of in terms of transparency, in terms of in conservation, getting a better sense of what farmers actually are doing in conservation practices, in terms of animal welfare, seeing exactly what the barns are doing, open things up rather than have a tendency to sort of close them down. In terms of research, sort of taking a look at the science that's taking place and realizing what the process is and where this is going. Are there ways you could see that being done more now than it already is? Chief White?
Yeah, and I think this is where we can get back to some of the technology stuff. Right now we have an application you can download to your smartphone that will tell you the soil you're walking on in every place in the United States and what the capabilities of that soil are.
Sounds fun.
Well, it's pretty cool. I'll show you how to do it. But that's just a sample. The technology is going to allow the producer to stay at home and do all this stuff, apply for programs and check out their own land, have access to unbelievable amounts of information. We have the science now that we know we can target our programs and have 3 to 5 times the impact per acre if we pick the right acre to work with, as far as a more specific benefit approach rather than a more generalized approach. So for technology, I think it does make it more transparent. A producer in the future will be able to tell, if I do this practice, this is the impact on nitrogen and phosphorus runoff, this is how much sediment I will retain, this is my impact on soil quality, here's how I can increase my carbon content, infiltration. If we could get our soil to the health where in the Mississippi River Basin we could absorb 1 more inch of soil. Remember all the floods we had this past year? If we can increase our soil health where we can infiltrate 1 more inch of soil in the Mississippi River Basin, that is the equivalent of all the water that will run over Niagara Falls in the next 6 months. That's a lot of flooding we can stop. That's a lot of money we can save, and that's a lot of dollars we can keep on the farm.
Mr. O'Toole.
Well, what I was thinking, a little different twist, is we trail our sheep 150 miles one way and back every year. And it used to be when people would see it, when we'd cross highways, it would be a Kodak moment because everybody would jump out of their car. Now it's a digital moment. I don't guess Kodak isn't there anymore. But people want to have a tangible connection to food, even though so few of us produce it anymore. And I think that's part of the role of what we're trying to do today is people have lost their connection to what we do. I guarantee you, we're super sensitive to the messages that are coming in. And if we ought to be troubled about anything, we ought to be troubled about the fact that only 6% of farmers under 35 years old. We have to send a message to young people that we want them to be farmers and ranchers. It's critical for our national security. And the only way we're going to get that done is by giving this message out, because clearly the tangible connection is much more different than it used to be even a generation ago.
A generation from now, what will be the relationship or the proportions between large farms and small farms in the United States? What's the direction of farming size going because of some of the changes that we've been seeing? Who should we pick on first?
In numbers of farmers or in acreage of farm, total acreage that's split between, let's say, more than 1,000 or less than 1,000?
Sure.
Sure, which?
Sure, let's see how many. What proportion would you say would be considered a large farm of, say, more than 1,000 acres, and how many will, say, be less than a couple hundred?
Recognizing the enormous change in the last 30 or 40 years,
exactly.
Are we at the end of the consolidation or not? And I'd like to hear the economists talk about it because of the price of land and whether or not a new farmer can really start if the acreage is $6,500 an acre and he needs 100 acres to make it. And then what is the definition of a farmer? If a farmer is selling more than $1,000, the department tends to, and look at Cindy over here, at what the statistics and economic services tell us about how many there are that actually make a living on the farm. Is $10,000 a year a living, or is $85,000 a year a living? And I think at the end it will be, my hope is that we're near the bottom of the consolidation, but I don't think that's correct in all parts of the country, though I think Cindy can tell us better. But I think we will always have that demand for local, and there may be urban replacements that used to be local farms around the urban areas. So if we start 1,000 a year and we give up 750 a year, but have a net gain of 250, then we'll see an increase in the numbers of small. But we have to make it profitable.
Well, and here would be another way of putting it. Secretary Vilsack has actually expressed it this way. The hollowing out, the disappearance of the middle in American farming, that you have large production agriculture that produces the vast bulk of the food in the United States. And then you have a proliferation of very small niche farms, with the result that when you take a look at the census of agriculture, the number of farmers is actually going up and the average size of a farm is going down, but the median is a much more elusive farm to find. And I guess I would then open this up to the rest of the panel. In the next generation, do you see the middle disappearing, or is there any hope for it? Or are we really seeing the emergence of two agricultural systems in the United States? One that is large production agriculture, export-oriented, another one that is very small, niche, and local?
I would tell you that it's all of the above, and then there's a transferability issue. I look at some of the young people starting out, very basic urban experience, not much experience with farming. Some of those people end up being large farmers in their lifetime because there's this innately American thing. I don't want to own everything. I just want to have the place next to me. But the reality is we need people that are willing to work. You can't fake your way through farming. You have to every day go out and do it. And it's interesting. I think there'll be the experience that we've had in the last generations. People that came over as farm workers became farm owners in the sheep business. The Basques that came to herd sheep now own ranches all over the West. It's that typically and uniquely American ability to have a desire to be a player that give you a good example. The Wyoming Stock Growers is trying to match ranchers without heirs with people that want to ranch. Think about that, the implications of that. And then looking at USDA as a mentoring and as a financing and as an insurance arm to give that new starting person a leg up. I mean, those are the kind of thoughts that have to manifest themselves for us to get into a new American agriculture.
I think what will occur, Alan, is what the market and the economy dictate. And I'll speak as the Fed, all right? $4 billion of programs. I really don't care if you're big or you're little. or you're rich, or you're poor, or you're organic, or you're conventional. What I would like to see is that in these American conservation programs, that a farmer, rancher, woodland owner can look at them and say, I'd like to try that on my place because I think it will help me. We have a lot of stuff that is pretty much benefits the big farmers, and we have an equivalent amount of stuff that is targeted towards small local producers, like fostering local food production through hoop houses. So I don't know what it's going to be like 25 years from now. What I hope is that we still have the capability to reach those individuals and help them attain their goals.
In fact, I'd like to see it so that we don't require that the average person spends 8 to 10 or 9 to 11% of their fungible income on food. If it goes the other direction, it will impact dramatically the rest of the economy. So right now we're in a good place. So whatever the solution is, I hope it doesn't force the price of food, the place that the person who lives in the inner city can no longer afford to buy fresh.
Well, one of the big factors behind keeping that portion of the food dollar down is having trade flows, of course, to be able to make sure that the least expensive products get to the people who need them. And for that, I'd like to turn to Mr. Dillon. U.S. has had record agricultural exports for the past 2 years, and should be at near records this year. At the same time, whenever you see individual countries with supply issues, or there's a short crop, or for whatever reason, you will see trade flows get cut off. For U.S. agriculture to expand, there's a feeling that trade needs to expand, but there's a lot of trade barriers out there. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the issues of the U.S. farmer feeding the world and some of the roadblocks that get up there when there are those trade barriers.
Yeah, clearly there are opportunities to move food to countries that are food deficit. So those are great opportunities, and I mentioned that in my first comments, where we believe that one of Cargill's expertise is to move food from areas of surplus to areas of deficit. But clearly there are some countries around the world that have barriers in place that make it hard to get food in, whether it's phytosanitary barriers, testing protocols, that you get a boat at destination and they just won't take it, and then it becomes quite a challenge. What do you do when you've got tens of thousands of tons of soybeans sitting in a foreign port and tens of thousands of dollars a day in demurrage? It becomes quite a challenge. And though that happens on a commercial basis, on a regular basis. And so that's why what we call trust-based system in trade, that if you make an agreement with a country, that they're going to take it, that when it gets there it's going to be delivered. And that's why it's important to work through governments and with the regulatory officials to make sure that the agreements are sound. But then something else always happens where other countries that might be food exporters also creates challenges, where it's happened last year and in 2008, where countries such as Russia and the Ukraine are also big exporters. When they had crop shortages, they had contracts on the books to deliver also to other food deficit countries. But when prices ran up in those countries, what did they do? They put in place export bans. Other countries like Argentina put in place export taxes, which served a domestic purpose. It forced prices low in their home countries, which kept their consumers happy. But it really did two things. It hurt the farmers. It reduced the farmers' stimulus to plant for the next year, which caused a carry-on effect for food security in their own country and globally. But it also hurt the food importing countries that were relying upon them, which forced prices higher around the world globally. And so those sort of policies create quite a challenge and quite a conundrum, and then you get left with countries like the U.S. farmer, like the U.S. and U.S. farmers being forced to carry the load during a time when we already had high commodity prices. So those are areas where, yes, U.S. farmers are relied upon to feed the world, but when you have other countries putting in place policies that have a de facto impact of keeping out our food, or policies that force us to carry a heavy load when commodity prices are high, creates quite a challenge.
This is a question coming from fooddialogues.com, so it's an online submitted question, and I'm sort of addressing it generally. I recently heard on National Public Radio a food expert state that there is more than enough food in the world to feed the world's population, but huge percentages are lost in transport or even at the grocery store due to spoilage. Is this concern being taken seriously, and are there ongoing efforts across the board to reduce this very serious problem?
Well, wouldn't mind addressing that. Our CEO, Greg Page, is on a committee at the Grocery Manufacturers Association. We're working on that issue specifically as a huge issue within the Grocery Manufacturers Association to take that issue about food issue and in transportation and manufacturing and take that on directly.
And the U.S. Agency for International Development has put that question out as a global grand challenge. If we could reduce the losses internationally and even in developing economies and smaller communities, reduce that by 10 to 20%, that much less needs to be grown. So it's happening at the research level and at the implementation level. It is being taken seriously because we recognize, just as we do when we change our wattage in our bulbs, that we're saving electricity and don't have to build another generating plant. We can do the same thing with food. We need less if we develop less, if we lose less. And the science and technology of that is a combination of post-harvest preservation as well as using genetics that allows the banana to last longer or the tomato to last longer. So there are ways into it. We need to use the best science and the best technology to get us there, I think, as part of the solution.
A question for Mr. O'Toole. If you could please speak a little more about some of the challenges that you have in terms of species management in your land conservation, and how do you reconcile your interests as a rancher with those of the government and regulators when those interests may possibly conflict?
Well, one of the things, there's so many myths that we live with. One of the myths is that cattle and sheep are incompatible. Our family has always done both for generations, and now the studies are coming out that if you do both correctly with good grazing management, you have a 30 to 40% better utilization of the overall forage base. That's worked for us. And I think this redefinition of what our food needs are going to be in the future is so clear. There is no deviant perspective or deviation of the perspective that we have to produce a lot more food. And I think once that the federal land managers get that message, and as a president of a group of irrigators west-wide, I said, when you go to meetings from now on, you say, we're here to produce food, get out of our way. If you want to get in the way, get out of the way. Because that's a mission. That is a mission of government, of the Department of Interior, the USDA, all of the accompanying ones. And I think the challenge to us is that there are some groups all over the country that will find some category of agriculture they don't like. Lawsuits stopped production in the Central Valley of California a couple of years ago, causing massive dislocation of both farm workers and production. Those kind of things we have to figure an end to, because it isn't almost allowable in this situation we're in the future to not have a unified imbalance do both conservation and production. I think that's a really critical issue into the future.
Let me ask the same question in a slightly different way for Chief White, representing the government. How do you work with farmers and ranchers when they perceive the government and regulations conflicting with their interests?
Well, we are a voluntary agency, and frankly, we have a statutory charge in one of our programs to help producers meet or avoid the need for regulation. Our view is we would like to turn all the regulators into the Maytag repairman. Everything would be so great that there's nothing to do. What Patrick's talking about, in the West, there's a bird that's on the candidate list. It's called the Sage-Grouse. Those of us old enough to remember the spotted owl, it could have the same impact if it's listed, but it covers 10 times the geographic area. Ranching as we know it in the West would shut down because of the checkerboarded ownership pattern. The federal lands would really be impacted. Secretary Salazar, the Director of Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, USDA, we're all trying to work together to avoid a listing, including the governments, the state governments, the state fish and game agencies of the West. And by working together with the regulators and the producers and the various entities, we think we can preserve Western agriculture and keep this bird off the list.
we're soon going to be going to audience questions, and please feel free to fill out your note cards and turn them in. They're coming toward me right now. But before we go to them, one final question for the entire panel, and we'll start with Dr. Langdon. When you're looking in your own field of expertise within American agriculture, are we going in the right direction? And even if we are, what are the areas that we must be mindful for to make sure that we don't go in the wrong direction?
I think we're going in the right direction, but again, the sustainability is going to be the key, providing what we need now and in the future without depleting our natural resources is going to be key to what we do. I have 2 sons that are eager to become involved in agriculture, so I feel like we're heading in the right direction. They're very encouraged and want to be part of agriculture, so I think that we're moving in the right direction with technology and increasing efficiency to produce what we need and use less water, land, and energy.
Let's start with Chief White and just make our way down the line. Are we going in the right direction?
Unquestionably. I'm very bullish about our future. The science and the technology are going to bring us together. They have the opportunity to unite us. I completely reject the thoughts that you have to do an either or. It has to be the environment or production. We can have both. We can have wildlife. We can have it in harmony with agriculture production. And I think the future is extremely bright.
I concur with the chief. There are clearly challenges, but within those challenges lie opportunities, and there are technological challenges, production challenges, management challenges that we can use to meet them, to meet not only our needs but the world's needs, and do so in a way that I think can satisfy consumers.
Over to Mr. O'Toole.
Yeah, I'm very positive. In my personal situation, I have 2 young people at home. It's just like getting electric shock every morning, with the enthusiasm. And we luckily have an opportunity to have diverse balance, and for us, it's really exciting.
I won't differ from my colleagues. I too am bullish, but I think I have one caveat yet. I think to ensure its success means that we should be continuing our education of more science. Make sure that we include agriculture and food in that science curriculum, and that the more people know about the science part of this and the realities of production, I think the greater chance we will have the success that we've all talked about and are bullish about. It's really about the right information to the right people in an educated way that has a science base. So with my colleagues at the Academy, I would simply put that on top of the bullishness about agriculture per se.
In lieu of a 7th inning stretch, let's give our panelists at this moment a round of applause. Which is sort of our line of demarcation to what we're now transitioning to, which is the audience question portion of the program. We have a few here, could certainly use a few more. Don't hesitate to ask more questions. The first question we have here is directed actually toward Mr. O'Toole. This person writes, I heard Mr. O'Toole mention that only 6% of farmers are under 35. Is that number based on farm ownership or within ag as a whole? If it's ag as a whole, how can we do a better job of encouraging younger farmers? Which I think is a general question as well as Mr. O'Toole.
I have to rely on the statisticians for the statistics. What I see in my own interaction is that is a very real concern. I go to meetings and they all kind of gray-headed, bald guys like me looking from the back, and you realize this isn't the sustainable direction we want to go. I will tell you, in our valley, which is primarily agriculture, it looks like all the families have a new generation coming on. We're very, very lucky. But I will tell you, and I believe this very strongly, a lot of it is message. The message has to be positive. Young people have to know how much we want them to be farmers and ranchers. And with the economics on the uprise and the potential, that's out there for them. But it's very important for government, I listened very closely to the President's State of the Union speech. And we need to have that messaging come from right from the top, that agriculture is important It's a critical part of our national security.
I'd have to note one thing, though. You're talking about, having children who are able to go into farming. I know my own circumstances. Neither of my parents farmed when they decided to start farming. They didn't have farming experience. They bought some land, were able to go and clear some of it and start raising sheep. And it made for an interesting childhood, having two parents who hadn't actually been farmers before, that's kind of learned on the fly. I look at land values in Iowa, and I look at some of these prices, and I look at the capital investments in the infrastructure that a person needs to be a beginning farmer now. And I just wonder, if you're younger and you want to do this and you're not from a family farm and have those parental resources and expertise, how do you get involved with that? Is that something we should be concerned about? How can that path be encouraged in 2012?
I think I'd look at historically at the land-grant colleges and universities, and what has been a part of the star show there is the extension groups that do know how to teach, whether it's for urban farming or for rural, pure rural or urban or surrounding. I think their resources are there. The NIFA, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, has a beginning farmers and ranchers program that helps to do research to help the people to learn what it takes to be successful. So I think we have the educational resources, the financial piece. I come from a family on one side of 10 and 9, my aunts and uncles, and 90% were either preachers or farmers or both, right? But I was surprised to learn they were all sharecroppers. They none of them owned their farms, and this is back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s until they finally retired. So I'm not sure it's necessary to own it. There were also the cooperatives which leased things amongst themselves. So there may be ways and new models that encourage a sharing amongst small farmers and ranchers, and grow larger as a consequence of those that really want to stick with it. I don't know, but I think we have to look at new models, not old ones.
You mentioned 2012, Alan, and Congress is engaged right now in reauthorization of the 2012 Farm Bill. There's several policy opportunities that can foster the transition or make it easier for beginning farmers and ranchers to get in business. For example, in your easement programs where you're purchasing development rights, you could have a mechanism in there where a young farmer could buy the ag value of the land from a producer who sells the development rights. This land would then stay in farming forever, and you would have a beginning farmer actually purchase land for the ag value. And Secretary Vilsack has called for a lot of beginning farmer stuff.
A question for Dr. Langdon. Do you feel animal welfare standards should be implemented from within the industry, be market-driven by consumers, or be mandated by the government, either state or federal level?
I think the industry is taking responsibility to raise the bar and create those standards of animal welfare. I think there probably is some need for some regulation, but I think that the industries themselves feel that need to be comprehensive in animal welfare and address that, and I feel like they are. But the industries themselves, I feel like, could create those standards with the help, of course, with the veterinarians and defining them. But yeah.
Question for the panel in general, I think. Besides issues of increasing production, what are the current or future issues facing the consumer from changes or trends in agriculture, i.e. food safety, hormones, genetics, antibiotics, prevalence, etc.?
Would you do the first part of that? What's missing?
Sure. Besides issues of increasing production.
Besides production.
Yeah. What are issues that consumers should be looking at in the future, including hormones, food safety, genetics, antibiotics, prevalence? All right. I guess, should consumers be concerned about these, and are there going to be new issues under these headings that people will be seeing in the next few years that are different from what they've seen before?
Well, I think you'd add, if I could start, I think you'd add there, what are the challenges that come from imports, for which we have less control than we do? How does APHIS, how do regulatory agencies deal with those changes? And how will the new genetics that might be done, let's say, in India or China, how will they be viewed? So the importance of harmonization of food safety guidelines, of standards for growing. I think the regionalization of regulations and the harmonization globally would help remarkably. Will that happen in my lifetime? Not likely. So I think the questions about the transparency of the process, which confirms safety, could use some tweaking. Do we need a central clearinghouse for safe food, which has been raised for as long as I can remember? We haven't bitten the bullet on it yet. Is it time to begin asking the academies and the scientists and the producers to come up with something that would confirm for the consumer that the food is as safe, if not safer than, the alternative?
Anyone else with any thoughts on that topic?
Yeah, I think on that issue, I think that the list of things that were listed on there, I think the consumer needs to know that regardless of how food is produced, it's safe. And the key thing is, if they want food produced a certain way, that it's available. And I think that that's an important component, that regardless of how it's produced, they ought to know that it's safe. And if they want food produced a certain way, that the marketplace is there, that there's plenty of companies, firms, farmers, that the marketplace is there to provide the type of food that they're looking for, consistent with their choices and their preferences.
This is also a question directed generally toward the panel. Has government regulation been too intrusive and difficult for producers in the U.S.? How can we work towards a reasonable balance of regulation and efficient, sustainable production? Anyone want to take that one on?
What was the first part?
The first question is simply, has government regulation been too intrusive and difficult for producers in the U.S.? And then the second is how to work toward the balance.
Let me reiterate a little bit of the conversation we talked about before. I look at the partners that I have as federal agencies as partners. And we are typically trying to solve problems. And those problems have been identified by people that really, what's the right word to use? They maybe have an axe to grind or a perspective that isn't really a positive perspective on agriculture. And what's troubling to me is if I have a range con in the BLM or in the Forest Service, I want that person to be out on the ground developing water, looking at habitat, working on wildlife. The reality is they spend most of their time in the office dealing with lawsuits from people who understand how a process works. That is not productive. We're losing their productive time. We're losing our ability to increase our production and diversification. And I think as a country, we've got to understand that, we go back to the percentage of people under 35. If we don't motivate people to be in a business that's very positive, they're not going to be in that business. The numbers show that. And I feel very comfortable with the partnerships that I have. I mean, I have some gifted people in the BLM, for example, on Sage-Grouse. So we've been working on projects for decades. And yet, to get them out of the office and into the ground anymore is very difficult because of this other sort of initiative stuff that's going on. I think that's a big deal.
I think perhaps the perception of over-regulation is greater than the reality. I work with the regulatory agencies, and I just don't find them to be the evil ogres that they're made out to be. The bad guy's never as bad, and the good guy's never as good. I talked to the president of a major chemical company last week. He was the European operations manager for his company. And he was telling me that EPA here is so much easier to work with than the European counterparts over there. So it might be what we're used to. When we're working with Fish and Wildlife Service on endangered species issues, I find them to be completely open and willing to work. So I think if people of goodwill sit down together, I think we can resolve our issues.
I'd like to add a piece that again, doesn't mean to be negative, but the bringing on board new technologies that would would be a positive for the industry does have some barriers. Do have barriers. Those technologies, getting technologies in the hands of the farmers, does have a barrier that is heavily regulated. And I think there's room there to adjust the regulatory so that it does a risk-benefit analysis and begins to adopt technologies that reduce the risk to the environment or the risk to food safety. And so when it comes to new technology, I think there is still a barrier that is certainly is more than simply perceived. I think it is real.
Oh, well, I'll give you an example on the other side of that. The state of Minnesota, your home state, wants to do a water quality program and give ranchers certainty that if they do what they can on their farm to address water quality, they don't have to worry about regulation. And the governor and Secretary Vilsack were signing this MOU, and the head of EPA, Lisa Jackson, flew out to Minnesota, and she only spoke for 5 minutes, and what she said is, we support the voluntary approach, and our job in this manner is to do nothing but stand back and let it happen. So I sense a great desire to let the voluntary approach work and thrive.
A question for Dr. Beachy. Arguably, no technology breakthrough in agriculture has had as big of an impact over the past century as the development of biotechnology seed traits in the mid-1990s. With the patents on many of these seed traits set to begin expiring in the next several years, what is the agricultural industry doing to ensure a smooth transition to generic seed traits like what took place in the pharmaceutical industry?
That covers two pieces. One, for the first side, it will bring more players into production of new seeds. We will see the involvement and the investment of university scientists that are using the new technologies, not simply the companies that hold the patent. So we'll see a wider range of opportunity. The real challenge here is how do you maintain the food, all the issues around environmental protection and food protection in the absence of the investment of the very large companies that have assured them to date. It's a question that the Secretary and the Department of Agriculture, at least when I was there, was actively engaged in. The discussions are front and center because they will be a large player. The release of patents will have a great influence on the kind of work that's done in our universities and small seed companies and family-owned organizations. And I don't think the answer is out there yet. I don't think the process, the pathway for a new application of an old technology is completed, and requires focus, I think, at the level of policy. I think the science will go on its own. It's the policy implications that are not yet addressed. So the question was spot on. It's one that needs attention. And I do know the Secretary has asked the question, but I don't know how it's moved.
Well, there's a follow-up to it. And this, Mr. Dearland may want to get involved in this one as well. Are the policies in place for foreign governments to readily import the surging supply of American farm goods, both in the total supply and with respect to the growing complexity of the biotech traits of our exports? And what needs to be done?
That's an area where there have been some challenges of late, but at risk of there may be some old products or products that have long been approved that may not be a challenge. But here lately, on some new products, there have been some challenges, and that's where we as a commercial company involved in the movement of product from origin to destination, along with many of our commercial companies, have struggled with commercialization of biotech traits before they've had a lot of had approval in foreign markets. And so that has been a struggle for us, and that's one where we've encouraged the biotech companies to seek approval in major markets before commercialization for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, that it is quite a struggle to get a boatload of corns or beans or whatever the case may be to a foreign market, and the importing country find a non-approved event. in a product. So that is one that needs major action and major concern. So it's something that we need to continue to work forward as an industry and as collectively on to resolve that particular issue.
Do you have anything to add, Dr. Beachy?
No, only that it go back to the comment I made earlier about the importance of sharing information and harmonizing the timing of approval so that the review of the science, the review of the safety is equally done here as well as in the importing nations. We've done it sequentially in the past, and I think since there now are 29 countries that are growing GM crops, there's an opportunity to share the information more broadly and more rapidly so that these barriers that you talked about for import are minimized.
There's still time for a few more questions. I will say I have a huge bias toward good penmanship, so please pass them along. We actually have a follow-up on one of the earlier questions about beginning farmers and the role of farm subsidies. Do farm subsidies, as they exist today, rob young people's opportunity to get into farming? What needs to be fixed? I'm thinking, probably talking a bit about how direct payments are capitalized into land values, or how some of the larger payment programs tend to go towards larger operations to begin with. So maybe that's some of the context that could be helped with that question about farm subsidies.
As I look at it, what happens, I actually have my story was that my wife and I were going to go to law school, and the day school started, we bought sheep and lived in a sheep wagon for 3 years and learned the business. What you find out is that young people, no matter how much advice they might get, there's sort of this inevitable wreck thing that happens. So I think mentoring is really important. I think the idea that we're moving to crop insurance is critically important, so that whether it be livestock or crops, so that there be that ability to transition, sort of the inevitability of being young. And I think the financial resources, which I'm seeing the administration really come out with some good young rancher and farmer programs. The chief talked about the ability to transition land into conservation and then have it priced at an ag basis. I think that, and water also, is an important component of our future. So there's tools out there that I think are coming to in almost a unanimous understanding that if we're going to motivate young people to be in, we have to give them the correct tools.
I think putting on my ag committee hat, I was professional staffer on the last committee. You think about young farmers and how to incentivize that. Can that be a factor? No doubt. But I think you look across the country, and regardless of where you are, there's always some factor that's driving up land values that hurts a farmer that would like to get into the business. Will direct payments be a problem in some part of the country? Sure. But where I'm from, in South Texas, Deepwood County has 100 new millionaires last year because of the shale. I wish I was one of those guys. But that's an issue driving up land values there. Conversion to houses in California hurts land values there. And so I think that regardless of where you are, there are challenges that increase land values that make it hard for young farmers. So I don't want to minimize the impact that farm programs may have in certain regions of the country. But I think that regardless of where you are, it's hard for young farmers. I'm 41. If I wanted to go back, I talked to my grandmother the other day about the 26-acre plot of land that my family, that she grew up on, that's been subdivided because her sisters passed away. You know how that goes. If I wanted to go buy the 26-acre plot of land, what would I be competing with? The guy next door that wants to buy it to put a couple of houses on. And so it's a tough. And she said, "Well, what would you do with it?" I said, "Well, Grandma, I guess I'd put some walnut trees on it like y'all used to have on it before they all died." And so I think it's a challenge that regardless of where you are, there's something pushing up, land values that make it hard.
Follow-up on subsidies. Another question. In difficult economic times, is it viable to keep heavily subsidized farming industries like sugar afloat? Or would we be better served to invest the subsidy funds in more profitable farming?
Or more research.
Or in more research. Are you touching this question?
I did by touching just with that phrase.
Does anybody have any thoughts? Make it a little more broad. Getting back to principles of comparative advantage. I mean, many people are aware of issues, WTO cases about U.S. farm policies, about industries that maybe are subsidized, leading to divergences in cropping patterns that may not normally be the case if you did not have, for example, biofuels. Looking at the role of subsidies in general, does the current subsidy system require reform to make it more equitable, more based more equitably in light of the market?
I might just give an example of how I might just give an example, and I'll let everyone else make their own conclusions. You look at a combination of, sugar policy, ethanol policy, and corn policy. We had a scenario, last year and energy policy. You had a scenario last year where you had the combination of gasoline prices, ethanol prices, and sugar prices created a scenario where the U.S. was exporting ethanol to Brazil because sugar prices were high in Brazil because of a shortage, despite the fact that Brazil is the largest maker of ethanol out of sugar. But yet we were shipping ethanol from Iowa to Brazil. Meanwhile, because of environmental policy in California, the ethanol boat going to Brazil from Iowa was passing the ethanol boat coming from Brazil to California.
You could say there were two ships passing in the night.
Two ships passing in the night. And so that, if you truly put in place a policy of comparative advantage, sugar would be grown where sugar should be grown, ethanol would be grown where ethanol would be produced, and gas and petroleum would go where gas or petroleum should go. At the end of the day, the current policies basically create trading opportunities.
There are a number of us that, I'm not in farming anymore, and so it doesn't come as a personal thing for me, but how we balance that question with the impacts of the subsidies, whichever form, on the opportunity of those that are in developing economies, and what the impact of our subsidies are on their ability and willingness to farm and to sell on the open market is something that needs to be addressed. Not all of the subsidies would necessarily affect international agriculture prices the same way, but I think that needs to be a consideration of what kind of subsidy patterns we have, and I think the Secretary and the administration have begun to react to these realities of economics and changing policies. So why not make it? Why don't we remove them over some period of time and allow this open market across the globe to encourage more farm production internationally, not just favoring us, but favoring food production internationally, because the global food security issue is in fact a global one, not a local one, and we can't provide it for everyone. So I think we need to do what we can to encourage agriculture internationally, and part of that may be to address our subsidy issues.
We have time for a couple more questions. One question: why is the government waiting before we make changes to our current food system, given the sustainability concerns addressed? What is the end game? Is it about money or a better, more sustainable, equitable food system?
There's this sort of perspective that we are waiting for the next thing to happen. The reality is the next thing has already happened. I call it islands of renaissance that are happening all over the West. Chief White notes about the big project in Montana that a community has come together to work on large issues. That's what's happening in my community. But I'll give you an example. A dozen years ago, the sheep industry was in dire straits. Probably going to lose the industry. Volatile prices. It was a small industry, and so I was able, with a group of people, to spend several years, and we formed what was called the Mountain States Lamb Co-op. 125 ranchers, 10 states bought the largest lamb and veal company in New York. We diversified. We took ownership. The cooperative now owned a significant part of the food chain. It has resulted in almost double the pricing over that dozen-year period. But we thought that we were going to be in the old corn model. We thought corn was going to be $2.50 to $3. We didn't understand that there was an ethanol issue going to happen. That's changed the whole matrix. And I think the bottom line is things are going to change. What we have to do is be smart enough to understand what is the big picture. The big picture is sustainability of not does each individual farm meet these criteria, but does the American food capability meet the sustainability level that the country needs to have, and improvise to that perspective.
Well, and that'll be a good lead-in for what will be the last question of the day, just sort of addressed to all panels here. And it gets towards some of the themes that we've been talking about regarding sustainability. In your own fields of expertise, once again, what would you say is the most important thing in your area that can be done to promote that sustainability economically for the farmer, productively for the purposes of feeding 9 billion people by 2050, and sustainably in the sense of maintaining a quality environment for those 9 billion people when that day arrives? Working our way from Mr. Beachy up to Chief White.
I'll do it from a science perspective. I think we don't know yet how to define sustainability. We know what it is today. We know that we want to have it better. I think a large part of the solution will be in practices that are being facilitated by research and new genetics and new technology. I think we aren't there yet, but we're getting better because of better seed varieties and the new technology. I'd like to see a time when disease resistance was the king and not chemistries.
Mr. O'Toole.
For me, I think I really try to embrace the stories that are told about the people that have in our ranch 130 years, and the stories about being able to go out and get enough sage-grouse for dinner, or be able to fish the creek and do this, and it seems to me that if we're able to maintain those uses in the way that the stories identify, that's good enough for me.
Dr. Langdon?
I think we're just going to have to keep encouraging our young people to get into agriculture and keep on being efficient and productive, and keep our eye on 2050 and continually improve every day.
Mr. Derlin?
I think if we can improve efficiencies and recognize that we can produce more on the same amount of land, we reduce pressure for developing countries to deforest and things of that nature. We've got to be more efficient using water, using our air resources, using our land resources, things of that nature. Practice comparative advantage in practice. Move food from those that have it to those that need it. Put in place these trust-based policies that I talked about, that we can count on the food that we're producing to get to those that need it. I think we'll go a long way in improving sustainability.
Continue focusing on landscape level conservation and ensuring our farmers the conservation measures mesh with their economic capabilities.
Thank you very much. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you to all of our panelists. This was just a great discussion, and I was on how we can use technology to solve some of the problems. It was especially fulfilling to me, having spent the last couple of days in USDA's advisory committee discussions on coexistence and some of the polarization that we've had around this topic. So I appreciate everyone taking time out of their busy schedules to be with us and share your perspectives on this topic. I also want to thank the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Alliance. I really appreciate your efforts for bringing diverse perspectives together to discuss important and challenging issues in agriculture. And I think it's going to help all of us as we try to meet these growing global challenges to feed 9 billion people by 2050. Last but not least, I'd like to invite all of you to our Ag Day Appreciation Reception that will follow as soon as we do a little bit of room reset. So I would like your patience, please. Please stay and network. Hopefully you can find a corner of the room that you can visit with some of your friends and colleagues while we move these chairs out. And then the bar will be open as soon as possible. So thank you.